Investing is an art. It's not a science. I like to use the analogy of wealth when I talk about investing because I see both of them as connected parts of the same piece. One is the cause and the other is the effect. There is a science to wealth. There are rules, there are laws, there are principles. If you obey those principles and laws and rules, if you apply them consistently, you can predict the outcomes that you will get. So you can actually say with some level of certainty what the outcomes will be by following the science to wealth. Investing, on the other hand, is slightly different. You can study investing in a formal way or informal way. You can learn that as a science. But the art of investing is really where we get to see the discipline and the principles of investing being put to use. So investing is an art. And because it's an art, it simply means that you cannot simply expect and follow a rigid approach to investing. It requires thinking. And thinking is something we do collectively, but we do differently individually. It requires judgment. It requires control of emotions. And we all have emotions that come to us in different ways and in different times and in different forms. It requires finesse, negotiation, adaptability, and all of that makes investing the unique thing that it is, which makes it an art form. It's not a rigid scientific approach. And that brings me down to the point I want to make. And that is that there are no formulas for investing that fits every single scenario. Just remember that. There are strategies, there are approaches, there are investment tactics that perhaps can work, but you've got to recognize the power that the market has. And you've got to be somewhat respectful of the fact that you're not playing against the market that can't react. In every marketplace, the participants determine the landscape of that market. And more importantly, the attitude of the participants in that space determines to a large degree the landscape, the environment, the outcomes. So, the art of investing is something you have to study, and the genesis of that process begins by understanding yourself, understanding your degree of tolerance to risk, understanding the level of patience you have, understanding how your emotions perhaps are portrayed and how you can learn to control, manage, not suppress the emotions. You've got to learn how to think from and not with your emotions. You've got to learn how to perhaps take that energy, because emotions are powerful things. A lot of us think that as investors, you have to have no emotions. You've got to be emotionless, and that is wrong. Emotions are simply signals. Signals. You've got to ask yourself, what does the signal suggest? What is it trying to tell me? Because in many cases, sometimes your emotions could be as a result of you having developed your intuition to a level whereby you just say, something doesn't feel right. I need to think about this for another hour. And in that period, if you can still your mind, you find those thoughts come to you. And perhaps it could be an investment that reminds you of something that you read somewhere previously, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And now that information flows back from your memory, feeds your intuition, you connect it to your reasoning faculty, and then you're suddenly starting to think about the ideas that maybe you never thought about before. And then you go back to the investment and you say, wow, now I can see this opportunity in a different light. So it really comes from that art form, learning how to paint the picture and recognizing that just like a blank canvas, there's nothing wrong with you deciding, I'm going to discard this canvas and I'm going to get a new white canvas and I'm going to choose a different spectrum of colors and I'm going to paint a different masterpiece. Investing is an art. Now let me move a step further and say something interesting. One of the important things you have to understand about investing is deciding what asset class you're going to be investing in. Are you going to be investing in real assets? You're going to be investing in securities, investing in stocks? Are you going to be investing in bonds? Are you going to be investing in perhaps digital assets? Now, each of those asset classes has a different environment. You have to understand the environment you're investing in. Now, let's assume you want to invest in bonds, or you want to invest in digital assets, cryptocurrencies, for example. I have a different view. Let's assume you also want to invest in stocks. I have a different view about how to approach it. I want to share that with you. I believe that investing in many forms is a negative art. Now you might be thinking, what does that mean? Well, it simply means that rather than me decide out of 2,000 public companies to invest in and find the diamond in the rough, instead of me trying to choose out of maybe 2,000 cryptocurrencies in the market, the one that will make me successful, instead of trying to pick out that one bond, what I simply have to do is go through those companies in the stock market and eliminate the ones that are not going to perform well. A negative process. You eliminate everything that you think will not do well, and whatever you have left, if you sit down and you intelligently diversify amongst what's left, you do well. Same process applies to digital assets. To choose from one out of 1,000 or 2,000, it's really hard. But if you approach it from the point of view of being a negative process of casting away things that you know are no good, you find what you're left with will be reasonable. And amongst those ones that are left, some will be really outstanding. And if you're intelligent enough to select carefully and diversify using a risk-based approach, you do very well. Same thing happens with bonds. A bond is simply a promise to pay. You give me £1,000. If I'm the issuing company, I say for £1,000 you're going to give me, I'm going to pay you 4% every year for the next 10 years. At the end of that period, I'm going to give you back the £1,000 you gave me, and over that period I would have paid you 4% every year. It's a promise that I'm going to make a payment to you. So rather than you waste your time trying to understand and recognize and find the best bonds, you simply have to say, well, I'm just going to find bonds with a promise that they're going to pay me 4%, that they have a good degree of evidence, that their risk profile is really low, they haven't defaulted on their risk previously, the company has a solid balance sheet if it's a company bond, or if it's a government bond, whatever it might be. But what you're trying to do here is remove all the bonds that will not pay 4%. Whatever you have left is what you invest in. You choose the right one, you invest. The point I'm trying to make is a lot of people are trying to find that diamond in the rough when it comes to investing, and that stops a lot of people from investing. And I want you to think about it differently from today. View this the same way your brain works. Let me segue a little bit and talk about your brain. Every day we have between 50 and 70,000 thoughts going through our mind. Every day. As we walk down the streets, there's so much going on. The person driving down the road, the young boy riding his bicycle, the lady calling out to her child to be careful, perhaps the bee flying past your ears making a sound, maybe someone smiling, someone hugging a friend, someone kissing. All of those activities are happening in real time. But your brain has a beautiful ability to cast away all those events that are not important and keep you focused on what is the most important thing. That is the negative art process. You cast away what's not relevant when it comes to investing, what may not do well, and whatever is left, you identify what those are, you study them, you invest intelligently, diversify, and you do well. It's really that simple. It's simply an art. Now that simply means that sometimes you might get your canvas all messed up with maybe the wrong choice of colors. However, what you must do, take a step back, ask yourself a simple question. What did I do right? And what could I have done differently? Knowing what I know now, what would I do differently in the future to ensure that I don't mess up my canvas again? That is the art. There is an art to invest in, just like there is an art to live in.